Kim Kardashian would have never survived Renaissance Europe. Let's be real, one rumor about her bleaching her goat or seducing a baker, and she'd have been strapped to the chair of torture faster than she could say, sponsored post. No glam squad. No contour. Welcome to Brutal History Sleeper. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe. Kindly tell us what you do, where you are watching from, and the time there. We'd love to hear them. We tell the kinds of stories that settle deep into your thoughts, long after the last word. This is not just history. This is sleep therapy, wrapped in blood-stained pages and foggy memories. Tonight, we wander back to the chair torture, one of the horrors of the Renaissance period. So lie back, breathe slow, and listen. Just wood, iron spikes, and a room full of bored men with robes, wigs, and a personal vendetta against anything that looked like independent thought. And that's where we begin tonight. With a chair. Not just any chair. A chair so evil, so patient, so perfectly silent, that it didn't need to move to ruin you. It just needed you to sit. They called it the iron chair, but that's a bit like calling a guillotine a neck massager. This thing was built for one purpose, to make pain feel like a slow conversation between your bones and the afterlife. It didn't scream, didn't laugh, and didn't twitch. It just waited. And when you finally made contact with it, bare skin against rusted spikes, you were no longer a person. You were a confession in progress. Let's set the mood. It's the 1500s. The Renaissance. A time when people painted ceilings and tortured heretics in the same afternoon. Science was being born, poetry was flourishing, and the justice system was somewhere between a Monty Python skit and a Saw movie. Human rights. Cute idea. Never heard of her. In a damp stone room beneath some self-important duke's castle, the chair sits. Built of thick oak and armored with hundreds of iron nails, long, slender, malicious. The seat, the backrest, the arms, even the footrest. Yes, they really thought of everything. If you leaned forward, the spikes would find your thighs. If you slouched, your back would bleed. It was ergonomic in the way a meat grinder is ergonomic. Now, they didn't throw you on it. No, that would be uncultured. They placed you. Gently, ceremonially. Tied you down with thick leather straps, each pull firm, intentional. Wrist by wrist. Ankle by ankle. Like they were gift-wrapping your suffering for some invisible god. Then they waited. And if that wasn't enough to loosen your tongue, they'd light a fire underneath. Not a blaze, just enough flame to heat the iron ever so slowly. You wouldn't cook all at once. No, that would defeat the purpose. They wanted you simmered. Tenderized. Like a fine cut of moral ambiguity. You might be wondering, who deserved this? The answer, anyone. Women who owned property. Men who read banned books. Girls who danced too well. Or too poorly. Or just didn't cry at the right time during Massachusetts. People back then had the emotional control of toddlers and the power of gods. A bad vibe was all it took to earn a one-on-one with the chair. And the people in charge? The real masterminds? They were churchmen, judges, and nobles. You know, the kind who now have Instagram bios that say, humbled servant of the people. They loved to talk about sin, but they kept a torture chair in the basement. If hypocrisy had a face, it'd be carved into the wood of this chair, probably right above the bloodstains. But let's pause for a second. Imagine if the chair existed today. You think the Met Gala's wild? Try watching half of Hollywood strapped into this thing every time they say, I just want to use my platform for good, while sipping $90 green juice made by underpaid hands. Or watching a certain billionaire cry out for mercy after being asked, how do you sleep at night knowing you just fired 12,000 people and blamed it on AI? Yes, the chair was brutal. But at least it was honest. It didn't pretend to be good. It didn't go on talk shows. It didn't post black squares on social media. It hurt you. That was its only job. And in Renaissance Europe, it did it beautifully. Some historians claim it was rarely used. That it was mostly symbolic. Right. And reality stars totally don't get BBLs. If a thing exists and humans built it, trust me, they used it. And the worst part? It wasn't efficient. Victims often passed out from the pain before giving any information. Others died mid-confession. So what did they do? They improved it. Added spikes to the neck rest. Installed levers to shift pressure. Some versions even came with foot rollers. Innovation, but make it evil. Still, the chair didn't care about your lies. Or your truths. It didn't need to. It just waited. Sat there while you questioned your God, your friends, your body. And then, when you finally broke, it didn't celebrate. It just held you. Tonight, as you lie still, tucked in and warm, remember this: your bed may be creaky. Your mattress may be cheap. But at least you're not strapped to a slab of history's bad decisions with spikes under your spine and a priest asking if you love the devil. And if the chair creaks in your dreams, well, maybe it's just your subconscious reminding you that humans, deep down, are still inventing chairs. Sleep tight. Let's talk about the Spanish Inquisition. You know, that sweet little chapter of history where men in robes hunted down sin with the subtlety of a chainsaw and the logic of a drunk toddler. The Catholic Church decided that Europe needed saving, from logic, from women with opinions, from people who ate dinner too late on Friday. And so, they gave us the Inquisition. A spiritual cleanse, with iron. It wasn't just about religion. Oh no. It was a political show. A drama. A reality TV competition before reality TV existed. Except instead of roses, the losers got the chair of torture. Welcome to Who Wants to Be a Confessed Heretic? Spoiler, everyone, eventually. Picture this. You live in Toledo. You've worked hard. You pray just enough to keep the neighbors quiet, and you don't make waves. But one day, your cousin, who definitely hates you and once stole your goat, whispers to the wrong priest that you said the bread at Mass tasted stale. Boom. Heresy. They come at dawn. Not with swords, yet. Just paper, sealed with wax and soaked in ego. You are invited to answer some questions. Kindly. Lovingly. In a room where the candlelight flickers, not for ambience, but because they want your heart rate up before the real party starts. And there, in the corner, sits the chair. Same old monster. Wooden frame, iron spikes, the smell of decades-old blood and disappointment. Some had longer spikes than others. Some had locks and straps engraved with tiny prayers, because apparently stabbing someone is totally fine if you do it with scripture nearby. The inquisitors were performers. They didn't scream. They didn't raise their voices. They just stared. Calm. Professional. Like HR managers who are very disappointed in your soul. First, they ask you questions. Not real ones. Not like, how are you doing, or, would you like a lawyer? No. More like, why do you think your neighbor saw you talking to the devil through your chimney? You blink. Confused. Then they nod, solemn. Denial. Classic sign of guilt. And that's when they offer you a seat. Now, to be clear, this wasn't about getting information. Most of the time, they already had your confession. Written. Signed. By someone else. Maybe someone named one who needed a lighter sentence, or someone who just enjoyed writing fiction. Your job wasn't to prove your innocence. It was to scream convincingly enough that God might forgive you. The crowd? Oh, there was a crowd. Not always in the room, but they heard. They always heard. Whispers traveled fast in Renaissance Spain. Faster than your last apology text. The blacksmith told the baker. The baker told the priest. The priest told his wine glass. By sunset, the whole city knew you cried. Loudly. The chair didn't break bones. Not always. What it broke was pride. People who once argued philosophy. Women who read poetry. Men who danced too well. All reduced to trembling skin, spitting blood, and mouthing, "Forgive me," through cracked teeth. Even the most stoic would break. Everyone breaks eventually when every breath feels like swallowing nails. And while you screamed, the Inquisitor would ask, softly, "Do you love your God now?" As if pain is faith's true measure. As if silence, pierced and bleeding, is sacred. Of course, the church said it was for your soul. Like influencers selling detox tea, it hurts, but trust us, it's cleansing. You'd think a God of love might prefer meditation or hugs, but no. He apparently wanted his followers grilled like tapas. Now, just for context, the Inquisition lasted centuries. Centuries. They weren't in a rush. Some of the most elaborate tortures took place over days. Interrogations would pause for lunch. Yes, lunch. Imagine a man casually biting into a roasted pigeon while your toes are turning black. That was the vibe. You'd confess eventually. Everyone did. Even if you had nothing to say. Even if you forgot your own name. You'd confess to anything. To kissing a cat. To stealing the moon. To loving the wrong him too passionately. Then they'd write it down. Seal it. Frame it. Another win for the holy spreadsheet. And when they were done with you, if you weren't dead, which was always a fun twist, they'd forgive you. Let you walk out, limping, half-blind, maybe missing a few teeth, but technically redeemed. Congratulations, you survived God's love. Just don't sneeze weird in public again. Meanwhile, the Inquisitors. They went home. Ate figs. Prayed. Slept soundly. Because they truly believed they were saving you. Nothing more dangerous than a man convinced his violence is holy. If the chair of torture had a personality, it would have been smug. Quiet, but smug. It didn't care about your heresy or your innocence. It just cared that you filled its silence with agony. It fed on your breath. On the space between your ribs. On the little whimper you made when the fire got too close. Tonight, as you drift off, remember this, you're safe. You're warm. You're free to think whatever wild things you want. You can whisper secrets into the dark and no one will drag you to a dungeon. Probably. Unless, of course, someone decides you've had too many opinions. Then again, the chair's retired. For now. But what about the castles? They were beautiful, weren't they? Tall, dramatic, romantic even, if you've never lived in one. Tourists love to gasp at the stone arches, the stained glass, the grand halls where dukes once danced and drank and played politics with the stability of a caffeinated raccoon. But no one asks about the dungeons. No one leans too close to that small wooden door near the spiral stairwell. The one that's always under renovation. That's where the real history happened. Beneath the tapestry of glory, there was always a floor soaked in piss, lies, and the kind of blood you can't wash out with time. Tonight, we step below. We enter the part of the castle the historians like to summarize with phrases like, "Justice was served." Sure it was. Served cold, iron-spiked, and strapped down. Welcome to Germany, Renaissance era. The land of brilliant composers, philosophical giants, and a legal system that treated human pain like a craft. The Germans didn't invent torture, no, they perfected it. Like they do with cars and kitchen knives. And down in the bowels of their castles, the chair of torture had its own room. Its own ritual. Its own fan club, really. Because down here, pain wasn't a punishment. It was a performance. Imagine a dungeon so dark the candlelight doesn't even bother trying. Chains hang from the walls not for storage, but for variety. There's a rack in one corner, an iron maiden in another, and somewhere in the middle sits our old friend, the chair. But this version's different. Upgraded. The German edition had longer spikes, a more reclined back, because who doesn't love a bit of lumbar destruction, and a metal frame that could be heated with glowing coals. Engineers, you see. Ever so thoughtful. The torturer, often a man named something friendly like Hans or Dieter, didn't just shove you onto it. No. He explained it. With the care of a man showing off his favorite hunting dog. This here is the seat. And these are the spikes. And this lever. Ah yes, that adjusts your suffering. Meanwhile, the magistrate, powdered wig, wine breath, dead inside, stood by scribbling notes about your guilt before you even opened your mouth. The prisoner? Maybe a farmer who sold grain on the wrong Sunday. Maybe a scholar who translated a banned book. Maybe someone whose only crime was owning land a baron wanted. Yes, land disputes were very spiritual back then. You'd be dragged in, half-dressed, humiliated, dehydrated, and told politely to sit. Voluntarily, of course, because forced confessions were frowned upon in theory. But if you didn't cooperate, well, that was its own kind of confession, wasn't it? The straps would come next. Thick, cracked leather smelling of 100 other regrets. Pulled tight around your wrists, your ankles, your chest. Then silence. Not because the torturer respected you. No, he was just waiting for you to make the first noise. The small gasp. The twitch. The moment the spike under your shoulder blade reminded you that bones are terribly overrated. Some cried immediately. Others, the strong ones, bit their tongues until they bled. Until the pain painted their teeth red. That's when Hans would nod, satisfied. Now we begin. One question. One accusation. One flicker of fire beneath the iron. And the chair did the rest. See, pain has a way of peeling away your story. It starts with doubt. Then it becomes panic. Then it becomes surrender. You'd say anything. Confess to anything. And they knew it. But that wasn't the point. This wasn't about truth. It was about dominance. About control. About reminding every poor soul within these cold castle walls that your body was not your own. It belonged to the law. The nobles didn't lose sleep. They didn't wander the halls asking, "Are we the baddies?" No. They dined upstairs, toasting each other with silver goblets and wiping venison grease with lace napkins while screams echoed faintly through the stone floors. That was just ambience. Like a wind chime made of human suffering. And the funny thing, if anything here can be called funny, is how efficient it all was. The German courts prided themselves on speed. Fast trial, faster torture, fastest burial. If they could have invented fast food, they would have served it with a side of confession and a free spiked chair toy. Sometimes they didn't even need full crimes. Just suspicion. Your neighbor said you looked at him wrong. Your wife said you mumbled during mass. Your servant said you had books. Dangerous stuff. Meanwhile, the torturer's hands, veiny, soot-stained, disturbingly gentle, adjusted the flames, angled the spikes, checked your pulse like a caring nurse. This wasn't sadism. It was duty. The way a tax collector doesn't enjoy ruining your life, he just has quotas. And the chair. The chair didn't blink. Didn't speak. It absorbed you. Your sweat. Your blood. Your quiet, broken sobs as your identity dissolved between heat and iron. One girl, barely 20, was accused of poisoning her father. No evidence. Just gossip. After 3 hours in the chair, she confessed to killing him, her brother, 2 chickens, and making love to Satan's goat. None of it was true. But the Spikes didn't care. Neither did the magistrate. A confession was a confession. That's what mattered. And the public? They bought the story. Ate it up like folklore. Because pain legitimized the lie. If you screamed loud enough, you had to be guilty, right? Fast forward to today. People cry over Twitter blocks. Rage over unfollowing. Feel crucified when someone calls them mid. Meanwhile, your ancestors were being slow-roasted over flickering torches for mispronouncing a bishop's name. Perspective, darling. Perspective. The next time you're walking through a castle and someone tells you it's haunted, nod politely. But know the real ghosts aren't floating in corridors, they're embedded in the wood. In the iron. In the quiet spots where the tour guide suddenly talks faster. Because the blood might be gone, but the memory isn't. And neither is the chair. It's still around. Somewhere in a museum. Or in a private collection. Maybe even polished. For display, of course. Education. Artifacts. We love to honor the past, as long as it doesn't stare too hard into who we still are. Sleep now. You're not in a dungeon. You're not strapped down. Your mattress might suck, but at least it's spike-free. You're safe. Probably. Just don't piss off a judge. Or a neighbor. Or anyone with a basement. Just to be safe. And yet, for all their fire and iron and God-fearing glory, there was one thing the chair couldn't quite erase, a story. You can bury a body, but whispers cling like smoke. Especially the whispers about Isolde Krantz. She wasn't a noble. Not some tragic princess with a kingdom at stake. Just a woman. A midwife. A widow. And apparently, that was enough to make her suspicious in a world run by men who feared anything with a uterus and an opinion. Her neighbors said she knew too much about herbs. That she spoke to cats. That she didn't cry at her husband's funeral, because God forbid grief isn't photogenic. They said her bread rose too perfectly. Her children never coughed. Her patients lived longer than expected. Clearly, witchcraft. Clearly, Satan himself was seasoning her soup. So one gray morning, when the sun refused to rise properly, as if even it didn't want to witness what came next, Isolde was taken. No trial. No questions. Just a tap on the door, a rope around her wrists, and silence. The villagers watched. They always watched. Eyes darting, hearts beating, thankful it wasn't their turn. And beneath the castle, in a chamber that smelled like mildew, spit, and generational trauma, the chair waited. It knew she was coming. They always came. The guards, heavy with pride and bad posture, shoved her forward. She didn't fight. That's the thing about women like Isolde, when you've buried children and held dying mothers, there's not much left to fear. Pain is familiar. What scared her was the performance. The candles. The silence. The way the torturer licked his fingers before adjusting the straps. The inquisitor entered like a man who believed his robe excused everything. Pious. Polished. Probably hadn't bathed in weeks, but smelled like power. He didn't look at her. Just circled. Read from a scroll. You are accused of heresy. Of practicing ungodly arts. Of defiling your sacred role as a woman by meddling in divine matters. Translation: You're too useful. Too wise. Too alive. Sit down. Die quietly. Isolde stood still, hair matted, eyes blank. She didn't scream when they sat her down. Didn't flinch when the spikes touched her skin. That annoyed them. They liked noise. Suffering should sound like something. So they tightened the straps harder. One spike broke through the soft part of her arm. Another pressed into her back. Her breath hitched, just once. The torturer smiled. Finally, music. They asked questions. Dumb ones. Do you speak to the devil? Have you flown at night? Did you curse Brother Matthias's goats? Yes, she wanted to say, and I hexed your soup too. But she said nothing. Silence, after all, was still resistance. And resistance was a sin. So they lit the fire. Not a big one. Just enough to make the metal sweat. Just enough to teach her body what was expected of it. The heat crawled. The iron warmed. The spikes deepened their conversation with her flesh. Blood started to drip, slow and rhythmic, like a bad clock counting down to nowhere. The Inquisitor leaned in, whispering things about mercy and redemption. Funny how those always came with screams. Isolde did not confess. Not right away. Her mouth stayed shut. Her eyes stayed fixed on something behind them, maybe God, maybe vengeance, maybe nothing. They added weight. Tilted the chair slightly forward. One of the spikes grazed her cheekbone. Another pierced through her thigh. The room smelled like iron and patience. The torturer cracked his knuckles. He was getting tired. She wasn't. That made them nervous. They accused her of being possessed. How else could she endure this? Surely no regular woman could stay silent with 24 nails in her back. They said the devil gave her strength. Because heaven knows, a woman couldn't possibly be strong on her own. They paused to eat. Yes, eat. Left her strapped, bleeding, the chair now a throne of quiet ruin. Outside the chamber, they enjoyed roasted meat and soft bread while the echo of her breathlessness kept the room warm. When they returned, her head had tilted to the side. Eyes half closed. Not asleep. Just somewhere else. They panicked. What if she died too soon? What if they didn't get the confession? You see, the church didn't like mysteries. They needed paperwork. Signatures. Proof. Even if that proof was dragged out of a woman who hadn't had water in 2 days. So they untied her. Dragged her forward. Poured something down her throat, wine, maybe. Or vinegar. Something sharp enough to pull her back into the room. And when her eyes finally fluttered open, when her lips finally parted, they leaned in. Yes, the Inquisitor whispered, hungry. You admit it? She blinked. Coughed. Blood on her tongue. Then, finally, she spoke. Your wife begged me to give her something that made you sleep through the night. Silence. Then rage. That was not the confession they wanted. But it was the one she had. The chair welcomed her back. This time, with fire beneath it from the start. No more slow dance. This was an ending. And still, she smiled. Not because she wanted to. But because it was the last thing they expected. And in that smile lived every woman who'd been dragged, bruised, silenced, and burned by men who couldn't stand to be ignored. She died later that night. Quietly. In the chair. No final scream. Just a slow breath. One last whisper. A name, maybe. A curse. Or just a sigh. They buried her in an unmarked grave. Said she was damned. But the chair remembered. It always remembered. Every woman like her. Every truth smothered under the excuse of protection. Every bone that cracked under the weight of frightened men and their sacred excuses. And now, tonight, as your eyes close and your muscles melt, know this, you would have walked past Isolde in the street. Thought her plain. Thought her ordinary. But she endured what most men wouldn't survive for an hour. All while wearing a linen dress and being told she was too emotional. The world, it seems, has always feared the quiet ones. The kind who don't scream. Who don't beg. Who die with their jaw clenched and their secrets intact. Sleep well. And if the chair ever shows up in your dreams, ask it if it remembers Isolde. Then watch it flinch. But of course, the chair couldn't have all the fun. Eventually, even its spikes dulled. Even its silence became predictable. Because torture, like fashion, like pop music, like celebrity marriages, requires variety. People got used to the screaming. The scent of scorched skin became background noise. The inquisitors grew bored, the crowds numb, and somewhere between the 50th confession and the 100th broken rib, someone said, let's spice it up. And so, the torture menu expanded. Oh, and what a buffet it was. Welcome to the Renaissance's worst-kept secret, the backup tools. Because when the flames grew tired and the iron chair stopped drawing enough gasps, they rolled out the accessories. Let's start with the thumbscrews. Sounds cute, right? Like a tool you'd use to fix your spectacles or crack a walnut. But no. This little device was designed to crush the delicate bones in your fingers until they splintered like dry wood. You'd be surprised how fast someone rethinks their theology when their thumb sounds like popcorn. Then there was the strappado. A real crowd pleaser. Simple setup, rope, ceiling beam, gravity. The victim's arms were tied behind their back, then hoisted high before being dropped. Not enough to kill them. Just enough to dislocate both shoulders and maybe shatter the last remnants of their dignity. They called it questioning. We'd call it dismemberment with flair. But wait, there's more. Enter the heretic's fork. A charming metal rod with sharp prongs at both ends, one under your chin, one at your sternum. It kept your head up. Proud. Poised. Painfully upright. If you moved, it pierced. If you sagged, it pierced. If you blinked too hard, guess what? It pierced. A lovely tool for making sure the accused maintained proper posture while awaiting execution. Meanwhile, in the corner, the iron boot waited its turn. An iron shoe you didn't want to walk in. Once clamped on, they'd insert wedges and hammer them in until your foot became a fine paste of crushed bone, torn skin, and regret. Cinderella could never. And of course, we mustn't forget the pear of anguish. No, not a fruit. More like a blossoming metal flower of pure nightmare fuel. Inserted into a mouth, or elsewhere depending on what flavor of justice was being served, then slowly expanded. Imagine a jaw being unhinged from the inside. Imagine dignity bleeding from every orifice. That was the goal. Shock value. Pain layered with humiliation. Because torture in Renaissance Europe wasn't just about injury, it was about breaking the illusion of control. Making you perform your unraveling in front of men who barely blinked. And yes, many of these tools were used on women. Often for being too loud or too quiet or present in the wrong place. Witches, midwives, scholars, lovers. A woman could find herself on the rack for reading a book or refusing a marriage. The bar was low. The blood was high. But men didn't exactly get a pass either. Step out of line, say, question a tax, suggest the Pope might not be perfect, or call a noble fat, and you'd be stripped, chained, and having your kneecaps reinvented by the leg crusher. It did exactly what it said. Turned your shins into soup with slow pressure. No sudden movements. Just the methodical sound of metal against bone while the torturer quietly asked, "Are you ready to talk yet?" And that's the part that gets lost in history books. The pace. These tortures weren't fast. They weren't flashy. They were slow. Deliberate. Meditative, even. The room didn't echo with chaos. It filled with whispers. With breaths. With the soft, wet sound of tissue giving way. This wasn't war. It was a ritual. A religion of agony. A theater with only one act, suffering, and a cast that changed nightly. The torturers? Oh, they weren't monsters. Not in the traditional sense. They kissed their wives. They played with their children. They prayed before bed. They saw themselves as tools. Instruments of divine order. They were calm. Courteous. Some even took pride in their work, discussing technique like chefs comparing spice blends. Ah, but did you heat the iron before tightening the straps? No, no, friend, you must let them anticipate the burn first. It softens the spine. And above it all, the audience. Not always present, but always implied. The townspeople. The clergy. The crown. Watching. Approving. Silently thanking God that it wasn't them. Because that was the real purpose of all this. Not confession. Not truth. Control. When the flames grew tired and the spikes wore thin, they reached deeper. Invented new methods. Combined old ones. Gave names to their inventions like artists naming paintings. All to remind you that your life wasn't yours. Your mind, your body, your silence, borrowed. Conditional. And just one whisper away from being revoked. Imagine your worst pain. Now imagine that pain being normalized. Institutionalized. Sacralized. People carried it like taxes, expected it, budgeted for it. There were torturers on payroll. Torture chambers on blueprints. It wasn't an accident. It was a feature. And the worst part? Some of the victims thought they deserved it. That maybe they had sinned. That maybe the pain was proof of their unworthiness. That maybe if they just held on long enough, God would speak. But God didn't. Only the screams did. Only the blood and the cracking wood and the soft rustle of robes as another inquisitor leaned in to say, God loves you, you know. Tonight, as you rest your head, as your bones settle into soft pillows and your breath evens out, remember this, torture was never about what you did. It was about who got to decide whether you were allowed to exist. And in rooms like these, with tools like these, existence was a performance. A test. A trap. Sleep deeply. And if, in your dreams, you feel a thumb tighten or a metal bloom open inside your chest, just smile. You're not there. Not tonight. Probably. But pain was never reserved for the poor. No matter how loudly the elite whispered that blood only belonged in muddy shoes and prison cells, the chair had a way of climbing stairs. And it did. Slowly. Patiently. Because even the rich, even the educated, even the ones who dined with kings and posed for portraits, they too had secrets. They too had enemies. And the only thing more satisfying than breaking a peasant was breaking someone with a title. Because when a nobleman screams, the sound travels further. Welcome to Florence. Renaissance jewel. City of art, of silk, of poison. A place where smiling in public and bleeding in private was considered good manners. Behind marble walls and velvet drapes, the chair waited. This one didn't sit in a dungeon. It sat behind locked doors, polished, oiled, upgraded. No rust. No dirt. Just iron and leather that gleamed like something sacred. This was the version you never saw on tours. The one reserved for scholars accused of dissent, for generals accused of treason, for wives who asked the wrong questions at the wrong dinner. The torturers here didn't smell like smoke. They wore cologne. Robes embroidered with family crests. Their hands were clean. Their shoes soft. They spoke Latin. Quoted philosophers. But their tools hadn't changed. The chair still pierced. The screws still turned. And the screams still echoed, only now they were muffled by silk walls and paid musicians. Because nothing says mercy like a lute solo during interrogation. One man, let's call him Lorenzo, was a poet. Beloved, well-paid, slightly too clever for his own good. He wrote verses about beauty, about longing, and once, just once, a line that was interpreted as being critical of a certain duke's hairline. That was enough. One dinner invitation later, and Lorenzo found himself in a room that smelled like orange blossom and betrayal. They didn't call it a torture chamber. They called it the reflection room. There was a mirror, a chair, a candle, and a man with gloves so white they reflected the flame. They didn't tie him down right away. No. That would be gauche. Instead, they asked him to sit. Politely. Like a guest. And Lorenzo, still smiling, still performing the role of the unbothered artist, obliged. Then came the questions. Not shouted. Whispered. Intimate. Like a confession between friends. What did you mean by the line about the cracked crown? Who gave you the idea that men in power could weep? Do you believe that truth belongs to everyone? Lorenzo, always one for dramatics, said nothing. Just stared into the candlelight. That was mistake number one. Because in this room, silence wasn't a shield. It was an invitation. They began with the screws. His fingers first. One by one. Each press accompanied by a compliment. You have such delicate hands, the torturer murmured as bones cracked. How do you hold a quill so gracefully? Then the straps. Tightened just enough to make breath a suggestion rather than a guarantee. His chest rose, but not all the way. His eyes fluttered. The mirror reflected it all back. And still, he tried to be poetic. Tried to keep the rhythm in his screams. But pain doesn't rhyme. Eventually, he broke. They always do. But what's strange about these private sessions is that the confessions didn't matter. They already knew. It was the ritual they needed. The reminder. That no matter how high you rise, there is always a chair. And it always knows your name. Sometimes it wasn't poets. Sometimes it was bankers. Or widows. Or a young duke's lover who had the audacity to grow a conscience. One girl, barely 20, was dragged from her own balcony for suggesting that maybe taxes shouldn't be collected during a famine. She died in silence, her head tilted back, her teeth cracked from clenching too hard. The duke called it a personal tragedy. Hosted a ball the same night. With fireworks. And swan pâté. Because nothing honors the dead like soft meat and a string quartet. The velvet mask wasn't about guilt. It was about theater. About maintaining the illusion that the elite were untouchable while quietly disciplining those who forgot their place. And the torturers? They were paid well. They retired rich. One even went on to become a bishop. Because who better to guide souls than a man who's personally unwrapped so many? The tools didn't change. They just got quieter. Quicker. Discreet. A chair hidden behind a curtain. A scream muffled with cloth and coin. No public square. No ashes. Just absence. And the occasional whisper. Didn't she used to live on the corner? Wasn't he the one who taught at the academy? Strange how quickly people disappear these days. And if anyone asked too many questions, well, the chair had room. Always. You might wonder, did the elite fear it? Did they walk past locked doors and feel their blood chill? Yes. They did. But they smiled anyway. Drank wine. Bought paintings. Laughed at plays where power was mocked and never noticed how closely the actors resembled their friends. Because the greatest illusion the Renaissance ever produced wasn't perspective or sculpture or celestial maps. It was this, the belief that wealth could protect you from consequence. That gold could keep the iron away. But it couldn't. Not always. And when it didn't, the chair was there, waiting like a loyal servant. Watching like a mirror that only shows you when it's too late. Tonight, as you lie still, maybe with silk sheets or a soft pillow or dreams of power, remember this: the chair doesn't care how much land your father owned. It doesn't blink at your education or your bank account. It only cares that you forgot. That you believed, even for a moment, that the flames only burned the poor. Sleep now. Quietly. Carefully. Because the mask is still out there. Velvet, yes. But beneath it? Always iron. Because eventually, even velvet masks can't keep blood off the floor, and secrets have a way of spilling, especially when the public demands a show. You see, torture wasn't always tucked behind locked doors or whispered between drapes. Sometimes it took center stage. Sometimes, it had an audience. Welcome to France. Renaissance France. Land of powdered wigs, wine, lace, and a government that believed the best way to teach morality was by bleeding it out of someone in the middle of the town square. Public torture wasn't just punishment, it was spectacle. A community event. An early form of content, really. Today we scroll through drama on our phones. Back then, they brought their children to watch a man scream through broken teeth. Because nothing says family bonding like watching someone's skin peel off while eating roasted chestnuts. Picture it, the air is thick with smoke and perfume. Vendors hawk snacks. A man juggles on the edge of the crowd. Children play tag while their mothers position themselves at the front for the best view. The prisoner is brought out, dragged, bloodied, barely upright. And behind him, his co-star, the chair. Polished. Deadly. Waiting. This was the pre-show. The main act hadn't begun. That would start once the magistrate arrived, with his pompous strut and scroll of crimes, most of which were either made up or overblown. Theft, they said. Heresy. Disrespecting the monarchy. As if disrespect alone could justify inserting iron into a man's back while the baker's daughter giggled over fresh pastries. But to them, it wasn't cruelty. It was culture. The nobles in their balconies saw it as civic duty. The peasants in the dirt saw it as justice. And the executioner saw it as a job. Everyone played their part. The condemned man. He was just the canvas. They sat him down, not gently. The crowd leaned forward, like theatergoers waiting for the first line. Spikes pierced. Bones shifted. And when he let out that first strangled cry, a murmur of satisfaction rippled through the square. This wasn't just punishment, it was catharsis. The people had no voice, no vote, no power. But watching a body break in real time, that felt like control. Like order. They didn't have Instagram stories, but they had blood. They didn't have trending hashtags, but they had gossip. Did you see how he screamed? Did you hear what he confessed to? I always knew there was something suspicious about the way he wore his hat. And the confessions, oh, they were rich. People said anything under pressure. Stole a loaf of bread. Now you're part of a heretic cult. Slept with the wrong person. Suddenly you're plotting to assassinate the king. One man claimed, mid-torture, that he'd ridden a broomstick across the Seine while singing psalms backward. The crowd gasped. Not at the absurdity, but at the scandal. And the children? They watched too. Eyes wide. Not because they were forced, but because they were taught early, this is what happens when you misbehave. When you ask questions. When you speak without permission. It wasn't just entertainment. It was training. A public service announcement carved into flesh. Some people brought blankets. Others sketched the scene. There were even poets, yes, poets, who romanticized the spectacle. Turned screams into stanzas. Called it, the weeping justice. As if rhyming it made it noble. As if turning agony into verse absolved them of the sin of watching.
But no matter how pretty the words, the facts were the same. This was a stage. And the chair. The chair was the most consistent performer. Always present. Always silent. Always effective. It didn't need applause. Just a body. One woman, accused of spreading plague by looking too long at a soldier, was tortured in front of 300 people. By the time they removed her, she was barely human, bones protruding, skin torn, teeth missing. The magistrate declared her innocent afterward. A clerical error. Whoops. But at least the crowd went home entertained. That's what mattered. Justice was secondary to the performance. It always had been. The pain didn't need to be accurate, it just needed to be loud. The fear didn't need to be justified, it just needed to be felt. The executioner, at the end of the day, was just a man. Overworked. Underpaid. Burned out. But the chair. The chair never complained. Never asked for a break. Never hesitated. It gave the people what they came for. And when the show ended, and the body was dragged away like yesterday's bread, the crowd didn't cry. They didn't protest. They clapped. Slowly. Respectfully. Then packed up their baskets and went home. To dinner. To bed. To prayers. And the next morning, they came back. Because pain, once you get a taste for it, is addicting. Especially when it's someone else's. Tonight, as you curl up in your bed, just remember, the past wasn't polite. It didn't whisper. It didn't hide its violence. It screamed in the open. And people brought their babies to watch. So if the wind outside your window sounds like clapping, don't worry. It's just history, applauding itself. Again. Because eventually, someone had to ask the question. Not, is this right? Not, should we stop? No, that would have required a conscience. The question was, how exactly does pain work? Because once torture became routine, someone, probably with spectacles too small for their ego, decided it needed to be studied. Categorized. Measured. Welcome to the age of enlightened suffering, where your screams weren't just entertainment anymore, they were data. This is where the surgeons and scholars stepped in, not to save you, but to observe you. Men with ink-stained fingers and an unhealthy interest in agony. They stood in corners, notebooks open, brows furrowed, murmuring things like, fascinating vascular response, while someone lost their fingernails 10 feet away. The body, to them, wasn't sacred. It was a puzzle. And torture was just another way to take it apart. Slowly. Carefully. For science. You were no longer a person. You were a subject. A case. A manifestation of pain behavior under duress. They timed your screams. Counted your breaths. Documented which joints gave out first under strain. At minute 12, subject ceased resisting. Pupil dilation observed. Fascinating. One doctor in Paris designed an entire chart mapping how long it took different parts of the body to break under different tools. Thumb screws. 8 minutes. Rack. 13. Heated chair. Variable, depending on hydration and willpower. And because they were men of reason, they tried to be objective. Detached. You know, clinical. While someone's tendon snapped beneath their feet. And yes, they drew it. Artists were invited. Sketchpads ready. They didn't capture faces, no. That would be too intimate. They drew muscles. Bones. The curve of a limb mid-spasm. The swell of blisters rising along the spine. One man filled an entire notebook with sketches of mouths mid-scream, open, gaping, trembling, and titled it Expressions of Sincerity Under Pressure. Because nothing says progress like a portfolio of misery. But this wasn't just for show. These studies made their way into universities.
Lectures. Dissertations. Future doctors learned about anatomy from people who had been forced apart, joint by joint, inch by inch. Bodies that didn't consent, didn't volunteer, didn't survive. Some of those same doctors went on to treat kings. To write books. To be praised as pioneers. They didn't invent pain, no. But they refined it. Turned it into knowledge. And knowledge, as they always say, is power. Some even argued torture was necessary to understand the nervous system. That the only way to locate the soul was to crush the body until it left. One particularly enthusiastic scholar claimed that witnessing a person's threshold for pain was akin to watching the divine flicker through mortal flesh. Translation: he thought a woman screaming while being flayed was basically a church sermon. And the churches agreed. After all, why not? It gave them more authority. More justification. If pain was spiritual, then their hands were clean. The body is temporary, they'd say. The soul is eternal. But you can't write with eternal souls, can you? You need flesh. Wounds. Blood on parchment. And so they pressed on. Measuring. Cutting. Testing. One case involved a man who survived 3 different tortures in one day. He was praised, not as a survivor, but as a rare specimen. Subject displays unusual resilience. Perhaps a case of hereditary fortitude. They didn't ask him how it felt. Didn't care. They just noted the swelling in his knees. The blood vessels in his eyes. The angle at which his spine curved when he begged to die. And when he finally did, they dissected him. Right there. In the same room. For science. For God. For knowledge. The chair was there too, of course. Watching. Quiet. Familiar. Its spikes still wet, still warm, still proud. It didn't mind being repurposed. Whether you scream for fear or for research, the chair doesn't care. It just holds you. Modern medicine, they say, owes a lot to these early studies. We know where nerves are. We know how long tissue lasts without oxygen. We know the precise limits of human endurance. But we don't talk about how we learned it. Not really. Not in the brochures. We name hospital wings after saints. We decorate anatomy textbooks with clean diagrams. We do not include the sketch of the woman who died after 2 hours in a pair of anguish, her jaw unhinged, her heart still beating as the doctor scribbled "remarkable persistence" in the margin. We sanitize the knowledge. Filter the blood out of it. And pretend it was discovered in a lab instead of a dungeon. The truth? Our understanding of pain was carved from real bodies. From real people. From the ones who didn't have names, only numbers. The ones who flinched when someone said "mercy" and learned the hard way that science and torture make excellent bedfellows. Tonight, as your limbs relax and your mind floats, remember this: someone once screamed so long, so loud, that a man with a quill said, "This will make a great thesis." That's the legacy. Not just the broken bones, but the notes written beside them. The measurements. The diagrams. The men who never touched pain themselves, but made it their profession anyway. Sleep well. And if you dream of needles or pressure or pages filled with drawings of suffering, don't worry. It's just history, remembering what it took to make you healthy. And then, just like that, the chair was gone. Not with a scream. Not with a fire. Just gone. Quietly. Discreetly. As if history had finally grown tired of the mess it made. One day it was the centerpiece of fear, and the next, it was locked behind a museum plaque or buried in a cellar no one dared inventory. They said the world was evolving. That laws had changed. That justice had become more humane. As if rewriting the rules could scrub the blood from the wood. As if paperwork could silence the memory of all those who bled. It didn't happen overnight. First, they said torture was outdated. Then, that it was illegal. Then, that it never really happened the way people said. And just like that, the iron chair became a myth. A whisper. A historical footnote sandwiched between tales of plagues and poems. Students read about it with mild discomfort, safe in their libraries, never imagining how it felt to be strapped in. But the chair didn't vanish. Not really. It just changed costumes. It moved into different rooms. Different systems. No longer out in the square or beneath a cathedral. But in prisons. Interrogation rooms. Cells without cameras. Sometimes it wears a badge. Sometimes a necktie. Sometimes it doesn't need straps at all, just questions asked the right way, for long enough, under the right kind of silence. And no, the spikes aren't visible anymore. But pain has always been versatile. It adapts. It learns. It waits. Somewhere in Prague, there's a museum that claims to have the last original torture chair on display. It sits behind glass, bathed in soft light, surrounded by laminated descriptions and school groups. People walk past it with popcorn in one hand and their phones in the other. They take selfies. Tilt their heads. Say things like, wow, people were crazy back then, before moving on to the next exhibit. They never stay too long. The room feels off. As if the chair is still watching. Still remembering. It has nothing to prove now. It already won. Because the chair was never about the spikes. It was never about the fire. The wood. The straps. It was about control. About reminding you what happens when you cross the invisible line drawn by the powerful. And that lesson? It stayed. Even without the chair. That's why your chest tightens when someone raises their voice. Why your breath shortens when a door slams. Why silence sometimes sounds like a scream that forgot how to end. Pain leaves a blueprint. And the chair was a master architect. Maybe that's why it's still here. Not physically, no. But in the systems we trust. In the fear that lingers behind polite conversations. In the fact that we still question whether someone deserved what happened to them, whether they asked for it, whether they confessed. The chair lives in our need for guilt before compassion. For rules before mercy. For comfort over truth. It's in our history books and in our denial. It's in every room where someone's suffering is met with indifference. It's in the voice that says, well, maybe they were guilty. It's in us. And tonight, as you finally close your eyes, as your body sinks into softness and your breathing slows, ask yourself this: if the chair walked into your bedroom right now, sat down across from you, silent and waiting, what would you confess? Not because you're guilty. But because you've been taught your entire life that silence means compliance. That stillness means safety. That if you just stay quiet enough, obedient enough, forgettable enough, maybe you'll be spared. The chair loves that. It feeds on that. So sleep well, darling. Deeply. Quietly. Just don't mind the creaking wood beneath your bed. It's probably nothing. Probably. If you made it this far, you're probably not sleeping. But if you enjoyed bleeding through history with me, hit subscribe. There's more where that came from. Pain doesn't rest. And neither do we. If you have any ideas or content you would like to watch, let us know in the comments section, and we will work on them. You can watch our other videos to help us grow. Have a good night's rest.